And now, ladies and gentlemen, for the final session in our political keynote series in the 2020 election, we turn to one of our own, Emma Mellow, formerly Senior Manager Communications and Change at ANZ, and FSC Conference Committee member who recently became Auckland Central's candidate for National. Emma has an impressive resume and a long list of achievements, and I am really excited to hear Emma's journey over the past few months, how she has found the experience, and to welcome here to speak at the conference, which she actually helped create. So you're a woman of many talents, Emma. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me back. I feel like I'm with friends and former colleagues here and family even. This has been quite the few months for me as the new Auckland Central National Party candidate. I was selected 2 months ago after Nikki Kay retired, who was a fantastic MP for Auckland Central for 12 years. So a bit more about me. I'm 30 years old, so I'm a young professional. I live close by here, locally in Auckland Central in Eden Terrace with my fiancé Chris. We're in an apartment and we're getting married next year. I've got 9 years of commercial experience, most recently at ANZ Bank, but before then at Sydney Airport, working and representing technology companies and also advising a minister in the New South Wales Government of Australia. I came back to New Zealand in 2017 and moved back to Auckland because I believe we've got a great city and I want to be part of that next generation that makes it even better. I got engaged in politics from quite a young age. My mum raised me, a solo mum, on a sickness benefit. We spent a lot of time in hospitals. When she died when I was 16, I realised that life's really short, and actually if I want to make a difference, politics could be the way to do it, and politics is a way that you can help people. I was raised then by my grandmother, Marion, who I call Melly, and yesterday was her 90th birthday. She made sure that every day after school I watched Parliament TV and was very engaged with the issues from a very young age. I feel very proud to have her and my fiancé Chris support me through this journey. In corporate business, we deal with groups of people who are having issues, big organisations. But a big difference for me as a party candidate is the fact that I'm dealing with 65,000 people, all with different individual concerns. There's not much more coalface than that. I was selected the day before the second lockdown. On that day, I realised that I couldn't just sit at home. I had to be out there talking to everyone I possibly could. So I got the electoral roll and I started making calls. I called 1,000 households over that lockdown period. I asked them how they were doing, what they were up to, and how, as a new candidate, I could help. I heard very clearly the struggles of Aucklanders. These people had small business, they had families and they were worried about their jobs, and they had complaints about Auckland's transport, Auckland Council, and another host of issues that I'm sure we'll get to today. Since then, I've door-knocked thousands of houses with my team since we've been in level 1. I've been on Waiheke 10 times and Great Barrier 2, because it's really important as the candidate for Auckland Central, you understand the distinct and very different communities of this electorate. Corporate leadership feel these issues via a balance sheet, but in a time of economic crisis, these families are feeling it with their livelihoods. One such case is a business that did a cry for help during that second lockdown, Vivace. Many of you will know it. It's a great restaurant on Fort Street. They were one of the many businesses affected by that lockdown that came out of nowhere. They lost thousands of dollars of stock. Their staff were left knowing what to do. They lost all the jobs and all the corporate events that they had planned to take on after building up from that first lockdown. So it's very clear that we can't have more lockdowns. Our businesses will not survive. And in central Auckland, we've still got businesses affected by every which way. We've got seriously bad traffic. We've got infrastructure projects like the City Rail Link causing delays and disruptions Auckland Transport's put cones everywhere. We had the bridge out of action, so people weren't coming in, and officers haven't returned to work. They need an advocate, someone who will stand up for them to make sure that business, councils and government work together to bring people back to support our small business. Some issues I've encountered are just caught up in government bureaucracy. I was over in Waiheke with my team after a day of letter deliveries, and the owner came out and said that he was working hard to open his business at night. He'd got a chef, and the chef had been made redundant in that second lockdown, and he wanted to open, but that chef's application was stuck with the Ministry of Immigration. For months, they had been waiting to see if they could transfer his employer. Issues like that slow down our economy. They need an advocate who will stand up for them and make sure that not a political campaign means action, but actually every day that the government does the right thing when it comes to business. The government needs to be a lot better at understanding the needs of business and not the $2 billion worth of costs that the Greens and Labour government want to put on businesses, which will do nothing to create jobs, nor the economic recovery we so desperately need. Another call I made in lockdown was to a man called Carl Budge. Many of you would have heard of him as the ASB Classic presenter founder and the runner of that tournament. I reached out and said, is there anything I can do to help? And he said, actually, yes. He had had a proposal in front of government for 3 months in order to get his tournament underway. I went on News Talk ZB and made the call that the government needed to act urgently to save this event. It's worth $20 million to Auckland's economy, supports hundreds of jobs, vendors. It was desperately needed in these times where our small businesses, our hospitality sector are crying out for support. Grant Robertson went on the radio on Monday and said it was all in hand. That was obviously not correct. About 10 days later, they cancelled the tournament, and I blame the government from the inaction from day one to not pick up the phone to people like Carl Budge and that ASB Classic and work with them in order for that event to go ahead. So it's been a busy 2 months for me. But what I will say is I've worked hard every single day to advocate for the people of Auckland Central. I've knocked on their doors, I've called their phones. You have to be out there and meeting as many people as you can. And I've advocated for them from day one. This is a really tight 3-horse race. We've brought the polls back from a 16-point difference between Helen and I to the last public poll of 5 points. We can absolutely win Auckland Central. So my message to people is if they want to see me in Parliament, if they want another young professional with business experience who lives locally and is passionate about Auckland, to please give their candidate vote to me and give their party vote to National. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. Come and grab a seat.
Thank you.
We'll do the fireside chat. Once again, there is the availability to send some questions through. I'll try and get to them if I can. 30 years old and you've been thrown into the lion's den in Auckland Central. Talk me through the last couple of weeks. It must have been quite challenging, and I'm thinking obviously the big episode on Ponsonby Road, the TV cameras, election campaigns. Was that an eye-opener?
Well, I have been involved in politics for a while, so I helped Nikki Kay over 12 years. I was a young nat back in the day, and I've worked for a politician. So I don't think I quite appreciated how much attention a race like this would have. I think waking up the next day after being selected and finding myself on the front page of the newspaper with my grandma was quite an eye-opener. But it's been an amazing journey for me and a platform for me to talk about the issues which Auckland Central care about. And that for me are jobs, it's better transport infrastructure, and making sure they have an advocate that will fight for them and their small businesses.
That episode, I'm just curious as to the exposure, because you had your leader with you that day. I won't dwell on this. Sure. Yeah, I mean, were there any regrets about that process and how it all turned out, or did you feel you were unfairly treated in terms of the national media?
Well, I'm really proud that Judith wanted to come to Ponsonby Road and walk down it with me. I think it shows she has great confidence in me as a candidate. And I invited supporters along, and they were very clearly supporters. They met Judith and she called them by their names. They talked about how they had hoardings on their fences. Really great that people want to come along and meet the leader, and that's fantastic. And that's common practice for every political party.
Fair enough. you are a blue-green, is that right?
That's right.
So you would put yourself on the Liberal side of the National Party?
That's right. That's exactly right.
So where does that put you in terms of referendum votes? Have you made a
Sure.
call on that?
Yeah, no. So firstly on the blue-green issue, one of my personal priorities in this seat is advocating for better restoration and protection of the Hauraki Gulf. It will be a marine graveyard if we don't do more. So I've been talking about that a lot in my campaign. On the referendum vote, of course, personal issue. What I say and what I think isn't really a big deal in terms of the votes, but I'm voting no on cannabis and yes for end-of-life choice.
Okay, on the blue-green issue, just picking up from perhaps on James Shaw and the financial, and you've also obviously worked in financial services.
Yes.
What do you think, this will have to be legislation in the next Parliament, of the idea of the risk reporting around climate change? Is that something you think you would be able to support?
Sure. Well, I'm not the finance.
No, and granted, you're not the finance person. I'm not going to hold you to that.
I haven't actually talked about this issue, or haven't had this issue raised with me. But I think it's really important that we make sure that we do have transparency around, from things like KiwiSaver funds. For instance, there's a lot more interest now on what is actually going on inside a KiwiSaver fund, and I think that's great, and that's a real change that we've seen in the sector. But I'm not sure about risk reporting. I'm not sure what our plan is.
No, and I accept that you're a candidate trying to get in, and I don't expect you to be determining National Party policy on this issue. But is it something you think you would try and encourage your colleagues, if you were to get into Parliament, to think about?
What I will say is that having someone with a financial services background in caucus and in Parliament will be useful, because I understand the role that the sector plays, and having had that experience, I hope to kind of be able to bring some insight to some of these issues.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because I wonder, as someone who's worked in fund management, when you look at the global situation at the moment with interest rates at 1.5% and the impact that's having on the housing market, does that cause you any sleepless nights? Do you worry about the global trend that we're in at the moment in that area?
I think everyone is worried about it. It's incredibly uncertain out there. And then here locally, it's incredibly uncertain for people on the ground, particularly those in Auckland Central running a business, not knowing if they're going to go into a lockdown again, right? So we're talking a lot about our plans to create a safe border, doing things like testing people before they get on a flight, making sure that we actually do test at the border when we say we would, stop another lockdown. And that's critically important. And that gives people the ability to have some certainty whether they can hire and invest.
But do you worry about the economic response in terms of central banks, in terms of the impact on the financial services sector of extremely low interest rates and asset bubbles, asset prices that are rising? And then we see the debate and the arguments coming from the left with wealth taxes and these sorts of things. These aren't issues that are going to go away in a hurry. That's
right. And I mean, the Greens wealth tax, which they've talked a bit about today, that of course affects KiwiSaver. Right? So the people in Auckland Central not only would be stung by their houses, but also their assets when it comes to super savings. So that's incredibly concerning and deeply unpopular in Auckland Central.
You have made jobs a key focus of your particular campaign, and in particular, I've seen a few of your Facebook videos and things. You've talked about the tax cuts. You see these tax cuts as an economic stimulus.
That's right.
Not just a philosophical, ideological policy. This is something that you believe is needed to stimulate the economy?
That's right. So $3,000 more for the average worker. That will mean they'll go out and spend and support local business. So like Ponsonby Road, a lot of empty shops popping up. We want to make sure that those businesses are supported, and not only with stimulus, but with policies designed to encourage them to employ new people. So Job Start gives $10,000 grant to a business owner who wants to take on a new starter. And of course, we're not putting on extra costs that will make life even harder for them.
How do you know people will spend that money, that tax cut money?
Well, people will. Because you give them $10,000. I would actually. My fiance probably wouldn't be too happy, but I absolutely would. And I think it's really important that we do see that across buy local, spend local, in the local communities as well. But there's a big issue in Queen Street, and they need someone who will stand up for them. Those businesses are suffering, as I've mentioned in my keynote. We need to make sure people come back to the city, and there's a real plan to do that.
The flip side of that is that the argument is that National has not left itself enough money in operating spending to cover the usual increases from inflation and other aspects for things like health, education, law and order, and all those other areas. $800 million is what's left in that first year in Paul Goldsmith's budget. You will be familiar with the attacks on that. What's your response to that? If you're giving people a tax cut do they miss out on services?
No, they don't. So we're increasing education and health spending. We're just being a lot more targeted in where we spend. And unlike the opposition where we haven't seen a plan, at least we do have a plan. And that's important. And of course, this is all about growing the economy as well. We believe that we should do that through partnering with the private sector, not government programs.
So when you talk about the business plan, you're talking about removing or preventing new regulations. Is that what we're talking about?
That's right. So higher costs, more regulations. We want to make it easier for people to hire in this environment because there's going to be hundreds of thousands of people without jobs. I'm really worried about in Auckland Central. We've got the highest number of young people than anywhere else in the country, those aged between 20 and 40. They come here to get education, to get ahead and to get a job, and we need to make sure there's opportunities for them.
But they could expect to not see an increase in the minimum wage next year under National?
Good ideas for boom times, right? That's all very credible ideas. However, in an economic crisis, we need to make sure people do have jobs, and that does nothing to help the hundreds of thousands who will be out of work.
What do you say to a young person in your election? I'm sure you've knocked on a few doors, who is renting, being slammed by high rents, is desperate to get into a house, can't possibly pay 9 times the median income. We've just seen house prices explode again in the latest round of figures. What do you say to them when they plead with you to do something about it?
I say it's incredibly tough, and I remind them the fact that house prices have gone up 27% in the last 3 years and rent $65 a week. We need to get more supply in housing, and we want to do that by reforming the RMA. That's a key priority. We'll repeal it and replace it with 2 pieces of legislation, one for development and one for the environment, because we've got to look at building more and making it cheaper to build and work with councils to unlock more land for growth.
Unfortunately, the one problem with the RMA and the reform, and I see both parties are promoting that, it will take ages to put legislation. We've seen it for the last 10 years, parties on both sides, but it takes an awful long time to draw up a discussion documents and to go through the process of splitting the RMA. So what happens in the interim?
Sure, well, we've made a commitment that we'll put it into Parliament by end of next year. So that is a short period. It's a priority, and I know that Judith Collins has been working on it for a long time.
One thing I'm been curious about with housing, and they may not necessarily be... the issue of Christchurch is something I know Judith Collins has talked about this, and others have said, hey, look, Christchurch is the example because you were able to free up land for because of the earthquakes. The city went west. House prices have been more stable, and there is some good evidence to suggest that's right. But then we see the last round of house price increases, an 11% increase in house prices in Christchurch. So there is clearly a demand issue as well, and I'm wondering whether you believe for cities like Auckland, the LVRs need to come back on, the loan-to-value ratios, or some other demand-side restrictions are required for property speculators as well.
We're focused on supply at this time. We want to make sure we can build more and more people can get into homes. We won't have another Kiwi Build fiasco under our government. The government promised 100,000 affordable homes. They didn't deliver on that. Long list of things they promised that haven't done, so we're not committing to schemes like that.
I think I have seen you acknowledge that in one interview that you felt that National perhaps didn't do as well as it could have in housing in its time in the 9 years.
Yeah, I mean, I made that reference to the fact that, there's some things we could have done better, and I wasn't part of that government then, so it's, I'm just a candidate now. But what I am saying is we do have a plan, and we want the chance to be able to implement that.
A couple of questions coming in from the floor. This one says, what's been your biggest learning from your political journey so far?
Learning, I think, actually, being really focused on what matters. And all my conversations that I'm having with constituents every day are on key issues around jobs, around infrastructure, around how we get Auckland Council moving again and growing the city sustainably. And I think that it's important to remain focused on the key issues.
Is that hard?
Well, sometimes when people want to talk about other issues, but which is great, good on them. We have great conversations, but remaining really disciplined and really focused, because you're working. You get up at 5, you have to be across with the media for the day, then you're on to conference calls and off to door knock, and then you're at lunch, and then you're doing an afternoon of calling and door knocking and speeches and debates, and you really need to keep focused on your message.
Dare I say it, that might be advice for your leader, but I won't make you comment on that. A la obesity. Now, this is quite interesting. How does your party share knowledge to help new portfolio holders build their understanding of the market sectors and industries. But I guess the question is, do you have people in the party that are helping you, navigate your way?
Yes, absolutely. I'm really so grateful. The National Party do a fantastic job in helping new candidates. Of course, I've been in the role for 2 months, so it's been a kind of speed curve for me on all our policies, but they're very good, and we've got a great number of supporters around to help us.
This one says, is an interesting one, should KiwiSaver be mandatory?
Well, National Party doesn't really believe in making anything mandatory. I have to put that question to Paul Goldsmith as our spokesperson. I think it's important that we do encourage people to save for their retirement in any which form. The issue we're going into now is we've got fewer people that are going to be working. That's obviously less people contributing or contributing less to their KiwiSaver, which is a worry.
But clearly, you would be of the agreement, having been in the fund industry, that it's been a great success, KiwiSaver?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a great product. We have to be flexible there to see how they want to save for their retirement. But KiwiSaver is a great mechanism. I'm proud to have worked in a KiwiSaver business.
Now, the Auckland Council, your leader has called for a review of the Auckland Council. Do you support that?
Of course. Has to be one of the biggest issues that people raise with me, the lack of accountability and engagement from council. We've just seen it in the last weeks in the city. Work's going on everywhere. People can't get around. They need someone who can get in there and advocate for the fact that we need access to the city for people.
Well, I mean, to quote one of your
works.
colleagues, Denise Lee, is that just not another working group? Is that what we need?
Well, no, we need a serious look at council and what they can do better, because the CCO report showed that councils aren't doing their jobs, the council organisations aren't doing their jobs, and we've got to do better. Yeah,
I've been staying in town actually, and it is very noticeable, the roadworks and the shops and the disruption. I've seen reports $100 million a week or something that businesses in the city are losing. What can you do what could you do in the short term about that? The roadworks have got to be done.
Sure.
People want to stay at home. That's a trend. What would you do?
Okay, so as a local MP, I'd work with council on what is a deadline to get non-priority works done by. Right? Because we know that the City Rail link is going to cause disruption for a very long time to those businesses. We've got to work how we support them, but making sure that it's easily accessible and it's actually an encouraged place to go to, right? So I've talked to constituents who say, I used to go to the city all the time, but with all the cones and all the changes of the bus stops, I don't want to go there. So that's the first issue. Second issue is how we bring together business, government, council on encouraging people to come back and work in the city. I know it's a long-term trend. We've probably got more people working from home, but we have to do more to encourage a culture of working in the city again to support those small businesses.
I think it was Vivek who said the council wasn't doing enough.
That's right. So
what could they do though?
They need to encourage their staff to come back to the city they serve. And work there. So that's the first start. But as your local MP, if I'm elected on Saturday, I'd like to work with all those groups and come together with a plan and get people back in the city again to support those businesses. All
right, we've got about 20 seconds left. That's a good chance to just ask you about the last couple of days. James Shaw thinks this could go down to the wire. Do you think it could come down to hundreds of votes?
It's incredibly close. It's incredibly close. I'm just working every hour, every day to just meet and talk to as many people as I can. And if people want to see me as their MP, I really need their candidate vote and their party vote.
And if you don't make it this time, are you in it for the long haul, politics?
Absolutely. It's a passion of mine, but I'm not thinking about that until Sunday.
Fair enough.
It doesn't happen.
Emma Mellow, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. Cheers.
Great. Thank you, Emma, and thanks for sharing your story and I guess the issues that are important to you as well. So thanks so much. And I do wish you all the very best in your bid for the Auckland Central seat and for your first election as candidate. Please now welcome Craig Mulholland, Managing Director, ANZ's Wealth and Private Bank, for a few words of thanks to James Shaw and Emma Mellow on behalf of the Financial Services Board. Thank you, Craig.
Thanks, Yvonne. It's my absolute pleasure to thank both James and Emma for their contributions today. It's amazing to have two political speakers that have had direct experience in our industry. And it's really important that politicians understand the inner workings of our industries and our businesses, so that when they're setting policies, they understand firstly how it impacts our businesses, but also, and far more importantly, how those policies, if enacted, will impact our customers. So who would have thought when COVID came through and we had to postpone this conference, and then we've gone from having a in-person conference to a virtual conference, that we would have two political speakers who are in absolutely pivotal roles for their respective parties and the future government in speaking to us 2 days before an election. Now, I know many people have already voted, but it's going to be fascinating, and I personally are going to be glued to the television on Saturday to see what's actually going to happen, what have the people of New Zealand decided, and what's going to be the platform for the next 3 years. So, on behalf of the Financial Services Council and all our members, to James and to Emma, all the best for Saturday, and thank you so much for taking the time to come in and join us and speak to us and give your views 2 days out from an election. Thank you.